Over the years of fishing rivers, I've really narrowed it down to 4 different things that I like to look for. We're gonna break them down for you here. Let's get into it. It took me a while to really dial in what I want to look for when I go to a new stretch of river. What gets me in the right areas is going to allow for a productive day on the water with locating some fish. And the first thing that I always start out doing is some map study, whether it's my LakeMaster map or satellite imagery is super key before I even get on the water. And I would say the most important thing I'm looking for right away when I go to a map is identifying key spawning areas on a river system. And every river's set up different. Some have backwaters that are crazy expansive, huge backwaters, and some are just straight river, no backwaters at all. So in terms of a backwater system, what I'm looking for are areas where there's not going to be much current, where those fish can make a bed, spawn, hang out for a week or two, and then get back to living their life, which is pretty much feeding up for the year. So those slack water areas, you've got your main channel and then a big backwater. For example, on this map system, if we go all the way back into generally your dead end cuts, such as this, there's not going to be much current there. Both largemouth and smallmouth will spawn in these areas. And you might ask, well, why am I looking for spawning areas? That's only going to get me in the right direction in the springtime. Well, yes, it will in the springtime, but it's also going to allow you to identify areas that are going to harbor a large targetable population of bass. So they're going to spawn in those areas, but they're also going to live in those areas. They might travel a bit to get back towards main channel or get back towards some current after the spawn, but they're going to generally live somewhat in close proximity to those spawning areas. So identifying those on the map first before you get to a river system is going to get you in the right area to spend your time on the water on those expansive river systems. Now, second, let's say you've got a river that doesn't have a lot of backwater. So let's cut this off, for example, here. What I'm going to look for then are more of your islands and your little back eddy, back shoot areas off of the main channel. So right here, we've got the main channel. On the left, a large island system here that's going to provide a current break for them to spawn on. So they'll get behind these islands, they'll spawn, and then they'll get back out on the main river channel. So those are also key areas on rivers that don't have large backwater systems. You're going to have a main channel with no islands, then all of a sudden you're going to come across an area with a couple islands. Those are the areas you want to focus on in the spring, as well as in the summertime. They're going to provide good current breaks, good feeding areas, and good spawning areas for fish. So that's the number one thing I look for when I go to a river system. Identify the spawning areas, and then it's also going to show you areas that are going to have a large population of bass that you can target throughout the rest of the year as well. The second thing that I really like to look for on river systems, and mind you, you're not always going to find this, but if I can find a clean water area, I call them an ecosystem, a clean ecosystem on a river system, that generally is going to support the most life and the most population of quality bass on a river. And so, yeah, there's going to be floods in the springtime, summertime, fall, where it's going to be blown out and muddy, and you just can't find clean water. But if you can, that's generally very desirable. And I usually start with my map to get a general idea of where those areas might be. Backwaters are super key in the springtime. You get a lot of spring rains, and so your main channel is going to be muddied up. These backwaters tend to stay clean, and there's less current flowing in and out of these. And so there's usually vegetation in the back of those as well. And so you're going to find a cleaner ecosystem in those backwaters that aren't right on the main river channel. And you can generally check your work by looking at satellite imaging. So you check your map first, okay, here's some backwaters. You can usually find several different sources of satellite imagery online. I like to find 2 or 3 of them because they're usually at different times of the year. And one of those is usually gonna show you a muddy main channel and some cleaner backwater areas to really verify that, yep, it looks like during high water situations or when the main channel is muddy that those areas stay clean. And you'll also find that on main river channel stuff too with those maps. You might find, let's say, for example, there's gonna be feeder creeks on river systems. And so your main river channel below a major feeder creek is gonna be muddy, right? Above it might stay cleaner. So that's another way to verify based on satellite imagery. Let's say you have a major feeder creek into the main river channel, below that's gonna be dirty, above it's gonna be clean. So in your, let's say, mid-summertime tournaments where the main channel had been clear, you get a big push of rain, below that feeder creek's gonna be muddy and it's gonna affect everything downriver of that. So a couple different ways identify the clean water. First start with your map, then go to aerial imagery, and it's really gonna paint you a picture of where to start to find the best ecosystem on a river. One of the things I look for is the presence of current. Obviously, you think of a river and you're like, well, duh, there's current everywhere, right? But that's not always the case, especially when you're on a system that has backwaters, expansive backwater areas that might be what I would consider slack water. The presence of current just doesn't exist. And at certain times of the year, that's really key, and we can kind of get into that as one of our other key topics. But the presence of current is huge. That's what these fish live in most of their lives outside of the spawn. And that's really how they set up and ambush bait and feed, is by using that current to their advantage. And so smallmouth tend to want to be in heavier current than largemouth. So looking for some of your heaviest current areas on a river, which is usually your outside bends or where you have the backside of an island and there's a current break coming in from a secondary channel and a main channel, right where that heavy current meets together, can always be a key place for smallmouth. But heavy current, smallmouth love living in it. And then for largemouth, you might think that you want to be in slack water at all times with largemouth, but that's just not always the case. Some of my best summertime areas for largemouth, they're in backwaters, but there's some flow through those backwaters. It's very minuscule, it's not super noticeable, but that flow keeps those areas full of oxygen, which in turn keeps the bait in the area, and then the bass are gonna be there too. So the presence of current and fishing around the right type of current, whether it's heavy stuff, heavy current for smallmouth, or just the slightest bit of flow under a duckweed mat, for example, for largemouth, is really key and something you always got to be cognizant of on a river system. It's not big. Still another little guy up on the sand. On a little swimmer. That's what we're trying to imitate right now, is just these little minnows and shad that are up on the sand. The presence of bait is a huge deal on a river system too. There's another, not that big of one, I don't think. It came off, darn it. A good amount of fish right here, feeding up on the swim bait. But anyways, the presence of bait is a big deal on any place that you fish. Rivers are no different, right? You're looking for the presence of bait that's gonna ultimately attract the bass to be there as well. Smallmouth, largemouth. Smallmouth generally, I would say, are more your shad and minnow eaters. That bait tends to hang more in your current main channel, secondary channel type areas. And then largemouth are, frog, crayfish, and a bunch of bluegill eaters. And A couple ways to identify just the presence of bait is use your eyes and your ears. And you can use your electronics at times on the main river. If you're in a little bit deeper water, you can see bait balls. But oftentimes the bait is gonna give themselves away if you just pay attention. And what I mean by that is you're gonna see flickers of minnow every so often, or shad getting busted. The fish will show you those areas at times too. With bluegill, especially when you're fishing areas with a bunch of vegetation, you'll hear them popping on the bottom of pads or duckweed mats or milfoil mats. So be cognizant of what's going on around you. Use your eyes, use your ears, and the bait is generally gonna give themselves away. Use your electronics, whether it's your traditional 2D, or if you do have forward facing, Mega Live here, when you're in an area panning around, you'll see bait balls too. So the presence of bait, as always, a big deal and no different on a river system. Decent one up on the sand. A little minnow eater. Got him on the swim bait. A little bit larger profile swim bait, imitating more of our shad versus the pin minnows. And that shad will be a big player for these smallmouth this time of year. But once again, presence of bait, matching the hatch, covering a bunch of water till you start running into some fish. And they're up in like no water right here.